directions. Before we start, though, I do have a prize for anyone who answers the following question. So I know I had some trivia last night, but I do have one last question. All right, so by show of hands, if you know it. First person to raise their hand, if Sammy can pick out who that is. The question is, what is the official motto of UChicago?
Prescott's Scantia Vita Exploratora.
Perfect, and what does that mean in English for all of
Let
us?
knowledge grow more and more, and so be human life enriched.
Alright, so I love that. That was, first of all, congratulations, that was an awesome job. So get an idea of that, right, knowledge, increasing that more and more, so that to enrich, right, the lives of human beings. And I think one thing about that I love is that it's so connected to what we do with Pathology Exchange, in that we are trying to, right, increase the knowledge and skills of our teens, of our students, to so that they can have healthier decisions, make healthier choices, and then enrich their lives. And I think as we go into the afternoon, I know it's a long day, and a long day last night too, but keeping those students in mind, right, that why we're doing this, what we are motivated by, does impact the service that we give, and ultimately the amount of impact and influence that we can have. And I think thinking about that hopefully will allow you to also build what is going to drive you and motivate you throughout this year. So we're talking about impact. One thing that we know does impact the student's ability to be successful in the classroom is what to do directions. And this is really what we use as Pathology Exchange to establish and to build a productive and learning environment for our students. And so to start off, I'll let you please pull out your volunteer training manuals, which are the white binders with the orange covers, to page 66. If you don't have one out already, please take out a pencil or pen and do so silently as you find the Do Now on the top of this page, 66. You will have the next minute to write down your response to this question, which is also on the front of the board. Again, please do so silently and begin. All right, so in the front of the room we have our wonderful LC, Steph. Round of applause real quick. And she is, even though we just had lunch, still really hungry and wants to make a sandwich. So if I could have one non-returning health educator, please read off their instructions. Saw your hand and
I just want to get the PB in the bag.
All right, one person who is non-returning. All right, so we'll have, say your name.
I'm Rachel.
And Rachel, can you please read off your instructions to her as you have it written down?
Open in a bag of bread. Gently remove 2 slices and place them on the table. Note, each piece of bread is 1 and 2. Open each jar. Use a clean knife to remove peanut butter. And place it on the bread slice you noted as number 1. Use the second clean knife. To remove jelly from the jar and place it on the place bread slice 1 on top of bread slice 2.
All right, let's give a round of applause. All right, so first off, a couple responses. What did you notice? I heard some laughter. What did you notice about that exercise? Those instructions. Yes, can you say your name first, please?
Melinda, there were a lot of ways to misinterpret the instructions given.
Exactly. Anything else? Thank you. Yes.
There's a lot of things that we assume that other people already know, like how to hold it.
I don't know about you, but I often use my mouth. Let me hand in the front to you.
I was just gonna say, yeah, like oftentimes we like think what we may think is simple might be like important or confusing to someone else. So like when we're teaching, we have to keep that in mind.
So we make some assumptions about what people know, and we don't always think about what is maybe easy for them.
Nothing she did was actually wrong. It was just not the easiest way to go, or like the cleanest way to go about it.
Exactly. So there are many ways to interpret directions when they're not necessarily clear or direct. Awesome. Those are all wonderful responses. I do want you to take just about next 30 seconds, look at the next question below. You're due now on page 56. And just fill out a couple notes you have there about how this exercise, and you've hit on a bunch of them already, but how this exercise might apply to your role in the classroom. Take the next 30 seconds to do so, and then we'll just have you share with someone next to you. So we're thinking about the idea of what to do directions. And the idea behind this is something that comes from a book called Teach Like a Champion, which is by Doug Lemov, something you may be familiar with. And as you mentioned already, the idea is that we want to make sure that as we're setting directions, we're also making sure that students are very clear about what expectations we have for them in the classroom and what they need to do to be successful. So during this time, we'll go through a little bit more about why is this important and what is it exactly, and make sure you have time to look through your curriculum, look through your workshops, and find areas you can have and use What's New directions well, to then be able to have a classroom that is very much centered on learning and being productive. All right, so if we go to the next, do one more slide. All right, so What's New directions? So we're thinking about this, I want to take a quick step back and think about our role in the classroom as a whole. So can I get someone to share out about what do you think our role is in the classroom as health educators in establishing a positive and productive classroom environment? Yes.
I think this year especially our goal is to sort of facilitate education in like a clear and comprehensive way in the classroom. It's like facilitating as opposed to like making it clear and concise as opposed to simplifying it.
Yeah, so really playing that facilitator role about being, like I said, maybe a guide on the side as opposed to stage on the stage. And behind this too is that we want to make sure that as someone in the front of the classroom, right, the reality is that you are setting both the tone and this expectation for behaviors for that classroom. And as you work collaboratively with your host teachers about how to create this environment that allows facilitation to happen, allows discussions to happen, that this all ties back to our directions that we give to make sure students are able to be engaged and successful in that classroom. So I'll take about another minute or so for you to turn to someone else next to you and discuss this question. The idea of, have you had a time, it could be in class, it could be just in life, where unclear directions negatively impacted your ability to succeed? Does that make sense? So where unclear directions negatively impacted your ability to succeed. All right, so I'm turning to someone next to you that you haven't talked to yet and discuss. Thank you. Can we just have a couple people share out about a time that they said or their partner said about when unclear directions hampered their ability to succeed? I'll hang up really fast. Yes.
All right, my example, this is going to sound really stupid, I'm now realizing, but I worked at Ben & Jerry's, and customers would always give me really vague, like, examples of, like, they would be very vague about what they wanted, and then they'd yell at me when I didn't give them some super complicated order. And so that definitely hampered my decisions, my ability to succeed, because they didn't tip me, and because they didn't clear directions.
both ice cream and financial success. Alright, and one response in the back too.
Yeah, like I've had essay prompts that are just completely convoluted and just don't make any sense, and I don't know what I'm writing on.
Exactly. So we all know it doesn't feel good, right? It doesn't feel, we don't feel great when we don't know what is expected of us. So if we can do that for our students, make sure they're very clear, then that will be very much beneficial for our classroom. So thinking about what's in directions, we're really just breaking down our directions into the most basic parts. And as we found out, again, often our directions that we give can be very vague, or they can also focus more on what we do not want students to do rather than what we actually want them to do. I think a very common direction that teachers will give is something like, don't stand up or don't talk. And while that may be necessary in that moment, we don't set expectations for being clear to students about what we actually want them to do as opposed to standing up or talking. So if we go to the next slide, on the bottom of page 66, you see 4 main qualities that we would consider to be encompassed in a strong what to do direction. The first one, go to the next slide please, is specific. And this is the idea that our directions are very acute to what we want students to do, both in the amount of time, for example, that they're provided, as well as the way that they're going to do them, whether it's the amount of volume that they're going to use while they're doing a task, or if they're splitting up into groups. We're very specific about what they will be doing in this activity or in this task that they're completing. For example, we can't just say something like, listen up. It's not telling them exactly what we want them to do. Rather, something like, please look at the front of the classroom, or sit up and face forward. It allows them to know what we want them to do and still accomplish in the end what our goal was. The next one is sequential. And this is the idea that our directions do provide a step-by-step guideline and map to where we want them to get to. Not only are they specific, but they're also telling them what step they need to do and in what order to do it. So it has a logical flow to it. This idea, again, is that when we're telling someone to be engaged, it doesn't allow them to know how to get from disengagement to engagement. Rather, what we could say is something like, please, open up your student workbook, page 35, pull out a pencil if you haven't done so already, and locate the do not on top of the page. When you have done so, please look up, and we can continue. So it provides that logical step-by-step process. And I know this may seem pretty straightforward, but it is something we want to be prepared on and be knowledgeable about when we're going to the classroom. The next one is observable. And this is a very important one. So we want to make sure that what we do say and the directions we do give, we can see pretty quickly if they're being accomplished. And so in the example of the do now that I gave you originally, I asked you to pull out your white volunteer training manuals with the orange covers. And I could see pretty fast if you had the right binders out and if you had pencils out, for example, or on the right page, page 66. Having a knowledge of the materials and also being very specific about what you want them to do, something that you can see quickly if they're following it, will allow you to be able to have those directions be met more quickly and more accurately. And lastly, we have explains the why. This is the idea that we as adults, we all appreciate knowing the whys behind directions that we're given. And the same way students also do as well. It's not always appropriate to use these for all of our directions. However, when you are able to do this, it does provide students the opportunity to know exactly what is behind, what's that future end goal of the directions that they're given. So an example of taking out the student workbooks, we're asking them to do so and look at the do not on top of the page. We can include it so that, I as your educator know that we're all on the same page and that we can move forward in this workshop together. Again, not a very complicated why there, but it does allow them to know specifically why we're asking them to do that activity or why we're asking them to look up to the front of the class. All right, so with this, again, that was pretty quick kind of past those 4 qualities. I'll make sure we're all on the same page on this. So if you look at the bottom of your page, you have spaces to fill in, if you haven't done so already. The specific, observable, sequential, and explains the why. If you can take a second just to fill out that section you haven't already with a brief summary, brief description of what each of those qualities encompasses when we're talking about what to do directions. back about what are we talking about when we're considering what's the directions to be specific. What does that mean in the context of directions?
You should say exactly what you mean and then give an example of how they could do that.
Yeah, exactly what you mean, right? Thinking about things like volume, thinking about things like amount of time that they have to do a task. Great. What about for sequential? What does that mean in the context of directions?
Just make sure you're giving like step-by-step directions, so you know exactly what's coming next and what to do.
Exactly. It's a logical order is what we're saying. And then observable. Yes.
It's easy to like tell objectively whether or not the directions are being followed.
Exactly, right? We can see if it's being followed. And then finally explains the why.
You need to be able to provide some motivation so the student knows what they're doing now and how it fits into the wider scope of the workshop.
Exactly, add in that context what you're saying. So I know, again, pretty basic overall, but when used well, it allows you to be that much more effective in the classroom. So if you look at the next page, page 67, you have a chance to, again, kind of beat this home a little bit more. And you have examples of different directions that are not necessarily what we consider strong what's in your directions. With the person around your partner, you have the next 4 minutes to transform these directions from their basic sense to including what we consider the qualities of strong what's in your directions. So you have 4 minutes to do so. If you have any questions, let me know. And please begin.
Learning about decision making. Before we begin our workshop, I want to make sure we all have a chance to complete the do now. I need everyone to take out a pen or pencil if you haven't done that yet. Once you have a pen or pencil in your hand, please open up to page 15 in your student workbook. And while you're doing that, I'd like everyone to be silent so that we all have a chance to think. Once you're on page 15 in your workbook, please locate the do now question and begin to answer it. When you're answering this question, please use complete sentences. Again, while you're writing, I'd like the room to be silent and your eyes should be focused on your own paper so that we can focus. We'll give you about 3 minutes. Please begin.
All right, thank you so much. All right, so what about the directions was specific?
It was like specific actions of holding this pencil, or once you hold it, open the door, so it's a specific page, so things that she could monitor in class.
Yeah, exactly. Showing them exactly your time, exactly what she wanted them to do. They expected it. All right, what about her directions was sequential?
When she was explaining, take out a pencil, open your notebook, find this question, do the question.
Yeah, exactly. In an order that made sense, right? In the way that she wanted them to do it. All right, and what about her directions was observable?
She asked people to work silently and keep their eyes on their own paper, and she can see that they're doing both those things.
Yeah, exactly. I love the idea of like working silently, right? And silently and quiet are often terms that we use. Really quick, what is the difference between silent versus quiet?
Silent usually means no talking whatsoever, and quiet means there can be some small discussion, but in kind of hushed voices.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. It's the idea that what we say, we'll make sure that we mean, right? If we mean silence, don't say quiet. Another tool we can use is also saying the directions at the volume that you want them to speak at. So for example, you can say, please do your work at this volume that I'm speaking at right now. Gives them a model of what you want them to do. It's a little more maybe accurate than just saying quietly or at a certain level of volume. And then finally, did she explain the why for some of her directions?
For speaking silently, she said, so that everyone could reflect and then pour on their own paper so they could focus on the words.
And again, it wasn't a mind-blowing explanation, but it did provide them with reasons for being silent, which is something that students often don't get when they're being told things. All right, so the main ideas behind this is that we don't want to take away any of your own style or voice as you present your workshops. However, it is important to be proactive in thinking about how can we set up our students to be the most successful in the classroom and make sure that their expectations and ours for them are very, very clear. It allows them to stay engaged and allows them to know how they can be a successful student in that classroom. So if you can all pull out your curriculum, please. It is helpful guide to know at bare minimum where we need to have these directions. So to have the next 8 minutes to work with someone in your workshop group to find the places in your workshop that would be useful to have with the directions and actually write out what those directions will be. And this is a challenging thing to do on the fly. Having a good understanding of what you want to say in each of these instances is important to be very clear. So you have the next 8 minutes to go through your workshop to find, first of all, the places that have the pencil symbol in there. What directions, also find other spots that you feel like would be useful. So what we're doing now is actually practicing out loud the directions that you've written in the context of your workshop. So we want to make sure as we practice the directions, given in the way we want to give them to our students, also including some other material that you have in your workshop to kind of get a chance to get that out and have someone hear you say it out loud. What you find is either a pair or a trio within your workshop group. Feel free to stand up and use parts of the room to speak out loud. Again, focusing on your directions, but also other parts of your workshop as you are going through that. So we'll have the next until 2:30 for this. So again, LCs, feel free to circulate amongst your pairs to make sure that if you have any questions to address those. But again, focusing on what's the directions that you've written down and different parts of your workshop. Working in pairs to both provide the workshop out loud and also provide feedback as you're listening. Any questions? All right, so you have until 2:30. And we'll vary classroom to classroom.
I have a question. When it comes to like some activities, they have like multiple parts to them. Like first they like discuss it with a partner and then they write it down and then they share it with the group or whatever. And I'm just curious, like if you have any ideas for like how many parts should you introduce at once? Like how much?
I think it's a great question, and also something that we want to think about that we don't necessarily have like an exact like you're gonna cut off here for this direction. But to understand kind of with the idea of responding to the students is how much can they really take in at one time? And how much can you explain very clearly without becoming too much that you're saying? And if there are clear cutoffs, like for example in an activity that you want to get something out first, and then then there's a drawing part, and then there's a discussion part, figuring out where are the good spots for you ahead of time to break up those directions that allow you to make sure that they're clear and that there's not too much information being provided at one time. You're right, we don't want to give the whole, as a large activity and large discussion or large directions. It's probably too much to provide them all at one time. But that's where thinking ahead of time and preparing that would be probably the most helpful way.
I would just say, though, on the other hand, that it's often helpful to give them an overview of the whole activity. For example, if you're asking them to break into pairs and discuss something, and you want them to write something down so that we can discuss it as a group afterward, if you don't tell them that, then they won't write anything down. So it's important to say, in a one sentence, say, first you're going to work individually, then talk to your partner, and then we're going to discuss what you talk about. So write it down so we can talk about it. I wouldn't put it like that, but that could have been.
But still having that end goal in mind also. I think these are great questions too to also discuss, especially with your workshop group as you go into and practice it, and also as you go into classrooms about what is really working and not working. And as Claire mentioned yesterday, that this is really a learning year for us for the curriculum, that we want to hear that feedback about what is directions or activities, and what is working well, or maybe not as well in that classroom. All right, so to close up, I just wanted to do a quick fist of 5, which is a tool you can also use in the classroom just to see where you're at in terms of your comfortability with what's your direction. So on a scale of fist to 5. 5 being you feel completely comfortable using what's your directions in the classroom. Fist being you have no comfortability at all with it. Then 2 through 4 being in the middle. Show of hands, or show of fists or 5. How comfortable you feel with presenting what's the directions in the classroom? Alright, so a lot of 4s and 5s. Awesome. If you have more questions, feel free to use your LCs, your sheaves as a resource. I'll also be here for any additional thoughts you may have. Alright, thank you for that. Turn back over to Sam.
Great. So now we're